talk about ESG technologies that are available and how we can use those technologies in-house to enhance our approach to ESG. So I'd love to know, I'll start with Victoria, how are you currently using technology in your organization to enhance your approach to ESG, and what differences have you seen?
So thank you, and thank you to Datamaran. I'm the backup to Sandy Nelson for those of you who were expecting. We love Sandy. So Bristol Myers, if you're not familiar, is a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company, and our focus is innovative medicine. So technology is and innovation is at the core of what we do. And I'm actually a biophysicist by training, so I'm this random person who landed in sustainability/ESG. And when I landed in this role, or made the conscious decision to move into this role, I was doing all my research, gathering insights. You know, Susie, Cadis, and Datamaran were the first people groups I came across. And we brought Datamaran in early and started to understand how does this, we weren't talking about ESG in the company at the time, but it was about bringing the technologies that I was familiar with and the company was familiar with in a discovery, in a research and development environment, and from the predictive and prescriptive analytics that we use to help plan our work. If not for having Datamaran in place and the tools and the artificial intelligence and be able to not just have the speed and the efficiency, the collection of the data, the ability to do the analytics, but also communicate that approach to our C-suites, I don't think we would have been able to stay on track or even ahead of track while we were working to bring this very significant integration to the company, because our focus was to keep our medicines to our patients. One of the things we learned as I was reflecting back on the work, we saved over 75% of the projected costs of what a traditional materiality assessment would have cost us. We gathered better information than we would have by just asking people. We had data and information and doing data-driven decision making. And then we also reduced, I'll call it the footprint, the reporting footprint, or the resource requirement to do reporting by over 65%, because we were making informed decisions on how we reported. And that led us to also making informed decisions on the tools that we started to bring in and build, not traditional, on who we're building tools with. We can get to that later. And I think it starts with taking an open mind and leveraging that to drive efficiencies, to drive impact, but also connect, again, at the C-suite, but also to the average person.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks for having us. For those of you who don't know, Petroleum is the largest independent downstream company in the U.S. And so we operate 13 refineries across our system from east to west. We're also in the midstream business, so we do quite a lot of natural gas gathering and processing, as well as some retail. We actually spun off our major retail brand, Speedway, sold that last year, but we still have the Arco brand and the Marathon brand of gas stations, service stations. We do a lot of work with wholesalers and jobbers in that space. And more we're getting into the renewable space. So our portfolio is actually shifting quite a bit from super heavy weighted on refining to more renewable diesel, which is really our big push in renewables. And also looking at a whole variety of other emerging technologies that we're considering investing in and partnering on. We also have a subsidiary, Viren, I serve on the board of, that has a proprietary technology, bioforming technology that enables 100% sustainable aviation fuel, renewable gasoline, and renewable chemicals. So we're super excited about that. We're getting ready to commercialize that technology, looking for partners on that venture as well. There's a lot happening in the space, and so I sit in the ESG space. I'm really glad the previous panel, on the previous panel we talked about, the intersection between ESG and environment, safety, and health, because that's hugely important, certainly for an industry like ours. The EHS folks have been around forever. They've been doing this stuff. They've been doing environmental work. Our EHS folks are very, very focused on climate and have been for a while. And they've been kind of pushing spaghetti uphill. So it's actually a really nice partnership that we have with HETRIC, because we've been able to help enable more of a strategic approach and kind of bring a lot of their work into this sort of, as an area that's getting more attention. On the technology side, we adopted Datamaran a few years ago, primarily to help us with our materiality analysis. Our company was kind of skeptical about doing materiality again, because they'd gone through one process that they didn't like. And so I'm actually a boomerang to the company. I was with a company that was acquired by Marathon previously. After the merger, I left and I went to Nike for almost 2 years. That's where I stole the idea for Datamaran. So Nike had been using Datamaran for years, and a good friend and colleague that I'd worked with previously was using it. So when I came back to Marathon in this new role, with this very specific and new emphasis on ESG, I brought that idea with me, and so we were able to adopt Datamaran. We've just scratched the surface in terms of what we can really utilize Datamaran for. We're using it for materiality. It got us over that hump of skepticism around doing a materiality analysis. It's already paid dividends in terms of helping us to provide data to support some decisions, for example, a biodiversity target that we didn't have previously, and other things as well. We're also starting to use it. I also oversee issues management, crisis planning, tier 1 media relations for the company. So we're also, and we have a methodology for that, but Datamaran and the data that it provides and how we can kind of slice and dice that, we have a lot of, there's a lot of potential there. So we have big plans for Datamaran there. And then, I'll just say, just in general, things like Maplecroft to help us understand risk around global renewable feedstock, for example. We've just adopted a platform called True Impact to help us better measure the actual outcomes of our community investment and stakeholder engagement, for example. So we're using it across a number of different spaces. We haven't really figured out how are we going to integrate, and there's a number of other platforms that we're also super interested in building a tech stack.
Well, it's really nice to be here, so thanks for having me. And just briefly about Cardinal Health. So Cardinal Health is a Fortune 15 healthcare company that both distributes pharmaceuticals and also distributes and manufactures medical supplies to hospitals around the world. We operate in over 30 countries, so a lot of people think we might be an insurance company or a hospital system, so I just wanted to let you know who Cardinal Health is. And so I joined Cardinal Health 10 months ago, so still relatively new. I spent 5 years before that at Campbell Soup, and prior to that I was in the life sciences industry, so it's a little bit of a homecoming for me to be back in healthcare. So we do use Datamaran, but we use a lot of other systems. So I'm going to talk about our tech stack, which is a new term that I now have that I'm going to use because I'm not in the tech world, but I love that term and I'm going to be utilizing it now. So we use a lot of different systems at Cardinal Health, and that can be complex, right? Especially when those systems don't talk to one another. But the way that I think about it is that our systems help us, if they're working properly, they help us to collect and validate data quickly, easily, reliably. And then they also help provide us with insights that can be utilized to help drive decision-making across the organization, whether that's at the senior leadership level all the way down, right? And so I think about sort of 2 key examples of success that I've seen in the short time that I've been at Cardinal Health where we've used technology, and I'll start on the data side. And I think sometimes we use our technology for company-specific information, and sometimes we use it for objective insights, and I think it's really important to have systems that allow you to pull both of those things together in conversations, particularly with your leadership, because they want to know objectively, what is the industry doing, what are the trends, and then they also want to dive into, okay, now tell me about the cardinal gaps or the cardinal opportunities, right? And so my first example would be, we've got a really engaged leadership team, which I'm very lucky to have. And we just put out our most recent ESG report last month, and we reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 18%. round of applause, right? Great. And my CEO said, how did we do that? Now, I've only been there 10 months. I haven't actually implemented any of these technology systems that were there. They were there before, right? We weren't really tracking how we did that. We don't yet have a centralized way of tracking all the projects and how they contribute to our emissions or energy reduction. And so we had to really quickly kind of re-engage with our technology and figure out, well, how can we slice and dice it in the way that we need to in order to answer this very important question of how we actually drove our emissions down by 18%. Because our CEO should be asking that question. And I think if I think about being in this field 10 years ago, if I were to say we drove emissions down by 18%, I think the leadership team would go, great, let's talk about that with customers. They wouldn't ask, well, tell me all the details about what drove that reduction. I think that's a real change in the conversation that's happening with our leadership teams, that they have to be able to explain it now because boards are asking questions, investors are asking questions, customers are asking questions. So we have to be able to use the technology to equip them with that level of detail so that they can tell the story more effectively. And then the other quick example I'll give is that we recently identified 7 ESG priorities that we are going to really focus on from a strategic planning perspective. Now, we did our materiality assessment, and we had 18 ESG issues, right? And so the leadership team is like, well, that is far too many. Of course it is. So how do we narrow it down? And so when we think about objective insights, systems like Datamaran really can allow you to do that objective benchmarking to help identify areas where you could be leading, you could be lagging, you should be accelerating action in order to keep pace. I mean, you need to determine kind of where you want to sit in the industry in each of these different issue areas. But using technology and using data to help tell that story to your leadership team so that they feel comfortable and they feel like, okay, this is achievable, is really a powerful way to use the technology as you drive into how you're going to prioritize everything that's under the ESG umbrella.
Super, thanks. So I think my next question is the kind of so what, which is, how has using data and technologies changed the way your company actually actions ESG or is perceived internally? And let's start with Karen, I think.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I mean, there's so many different dynamics, right, and different drivers for decision-making and prioritization in this space. I'm in the energy industry. I mean, you're in fossil fuels. So there's sort of a natural prioritization that's happening in the world. There's no denying that. Within that, there are a lot of different paths that we can take. And prioritization actually becomes ever more important. It's really easy to let the E take over. One of my big jobs is to constantly be raising my hand on the S and reminding people that, especially as an energy company that continues to be, even though we're evolving, even though we're shifting our portfolio to be more invested in low carbon, we're still in this space of oil and gas. And so we can't really credibly, call ourselves a sustainable company or say that we're on a sustainability journey if we're only focused on the environmental piece. And that's a little bit of a conundrum for people sometimes, like, hey, and I'm constantly reminding people sustainability is comprehensive. This whole ESG thing is just a technical term, whatever, but it's a good way to remind them that sustainability encompasses the E, the S, and the G. More and more, it's kind of hit them that there's this really important intersectionality. Like, hey, climate change matters because of people, right? So the intersection between the E and the S, and certainly for our industry and our company, we're getting hit all the time with environmental justice, right? We're very proactive about that. We have a lot going on in that space. We're actually one of the first companies to publish a just transition report. So we're definitely involved there in terms of how technology has helped us. That objective analysis and those insights and data, and don't just take our word for it. And also, by the way, don't just listen to the noisiest investors either, or your top 3. Important, but not the only insights and inputs that you should be looking at. So the data helps us quite a bit with that. I think it can help us further. this whole new, brand new world of, you know, sort of ratcheting up expectations and the need for like ever greater data quality and auditable data, things like that, that's where I think, you know, we have a lot of opportunity to jump into spaces with companies like the companies here, Persephone and others, who can help us really get our arms around, you know, the data in a way that is, you know, high quality, defendable, all that. So more to come. Hope that helped.
Yeah. Megan, what about you?
So I would say when I think about being in this field over a decade ago, I think about how an ESG practitioner was sort of perceived, or this ESG work was perceived by companies, and it was sort of like, oh, you go do that lighting retrofit, you know? Like, oh, I'll give you a little bit of money, go get some stuff done, you know, we want a good story to tell to our customers. Absolutely no tie to business value. And I think the perception of ESG professionals were not really professional, right? Like sort of this like tree-hugging hippie kind of viewpoint. And I was always like, I have a master's in this, I have expertise in this, right? But it was always perceived as this sort of other extra, you know, there was something that was said earlier in the conference, someone said, it can't be a bolt-on, it has to be a built-in. And that really resonated because it has felt like a bolt-on for all of us for so long. So I think that the ability to use technology and data in particular has really elevated the conversation that we've been able to have with our leadership teams and has made them sort of look at us more seriously and look at this work more seriously and trust that what we are telling them is valid, it's legitimate, and it's backed by data, which is what they're used to seeing, right? I mean, when they're thinking about supply chain planning or financial planning or strategic planning, I mean, it's all backed by data. So certainly our work should also be backed by data, right? We don't want it to seem fluffy or like they can poke holes in it in any way. So that's been a big shift that I've seen. And I'd also say that it is our job to empower our leadership to think critically about ESG risks, right? And to think about how can I, as I'm thinking about my business as a leader, think about how ESG risks intersect business risks. And they have not had to do that before, really, right? Some have chosen to do that on their own, but I think we sometimes take for granted that we are like steeped in this work. We think about it every day, we are in it every day, and it takes time to sort of build that muscle to look at things through an ESG lens. And I always like to talk about it as my ESG glasses. Like, my ESG glasses are on 24 hours a day. Like, it's hard for me to take my ESG glasses off. Sometimes I wish I could. But we have to like help our leaders figure out how do they put their ESG glasses on to look at things through this ESG lens so that they can think about ESG risk in a way that they never have had to before. And they have to now because the stakeholders are requiring that they do it. Right? So it's our job to use technology and use data to help educate them so that they have the tools to sort of build that lens, that muscle, those ESG glasses.
That's great. Victoria, is that your experience as well?
It is, and I think of it as the data allows us to provide the context to it's what's in it for me, right? Whoever you're talking to at whatever level, you've got to connect. It's meeting them, you know, where they are, but it's also who they are. And what's in it for me, and it's data-based. I get asked, I was thrown a while ago, about 2 years ago, I was asked, why does Bristol Myers Squibb care about GHG emissions? And we care a lot about GHG emissions and the intersectionality of climate and human health is not new. We've heard a lot about it today, or this week. And I quote often the WHO has old statistics, 2018, still good. 8 million people died in around the world in 2018 from exposure to air contaminated from the use of fossil fuels. And of those 8 million people, 27% died from lung illnesses, 24% from cardiovascular. Okay, that's great. Well, when you're Bristol Myers Squibb and your products, you have billion-dollar drugs on the market for lung cancer and cardiovascular, and you're telling your scientists and your leadership and your commercial teams, This is why we need to care about GHG emissions. All of a sudden now you're connecting to our purpose and to our company mission and to our company strategy and our values. But we have to do it in a way that we're not telling them about GHG emissions and how much, megatons of CO2, because who understands that? So we've broken our data kind of into 3 buckets, if you will. We call it performance metrics, GHG protocol. We heard, Persephone's, kind of really doing amazing work on this. We've been getting our GHG data audited, scope 1, 2, 3, 7 categories of scope 3 audited against the GHG protocol. And there's about this many people in the company that understand what that means. And then so we call this performance metrics. We call things activity metrics that have impact, but it goes back to what Joel was saying, that it might not be measurable, quantitative, or auditable, but you can provide a metric that people can understand. If you close your hood sash, it's going to reduce our energy consumption, and we have X many labs, and it adds up to a certain percentage that actually becomes meaningful. And then we have this 3rd bucket, which we call normative metrics. And the normative metrics put everything into context, like how many vehicles are on the road, or how much water did we use, and how many days of water or hours of water flowing over the Niagara Falls. Putting into context and figuring out how that data, that same piece of data, can be bifurcated or trifurcated in this case into different ways of providing context to people. We've got to be able to take complex data, complex information, and translate that. And the technology allows us to do that because it's pulling information in from different places, and it's helping, everybody and their brother has a calculator that says, how many cars did that mean? But you got to be able to do it without being up all night going, oh, I've got to figure this one out. And we're streamlining this. We're building this into the data tools of our data stack. And I actually have a bit of an IT background, so I'm kind of digging the IT stack conversation. And I think that helps because it also allows us to speak to our C-suite, to pay for a lot of these projects that aren't changing the light bulbs, but are, in the hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. And building a new building, it's not what we do for a living, but we have to build manufacturing buildings. We're highly regulated industry. And, engineering loves nothing more than to value engineer something out, and they love an ROI of return on your investment. And I'm like, no. It's risk of inaction. What is the risk if you do not build this facility as this manufacturing facility, this R&D facility, to be electrified? Well, why should we spend that money? Well, because I've been able to go into Datamaran, or I've been able to go into other tools and look for soft law, emerging hard law, and it's coming, and it's in California. By the way, that happens to be where we're building a building per se. And it might be 3 or 5 years out. So if you don't want to ask for the money, because you forgot to do it at the beginning, because you brought me into the conversation at the end, I'm not signing off on this until you do the calculation of what is it going to cost when that law comes into place for you to course correct. Because that's how much, and it tends to be between 10 and 50-fold more to course correct. So when you start using data from all these sources and be able to pull them in to the context, to the story, it starts to change the narrative and the conversation and making better informed decisions.
So let's do some horizon scanning. We've been talking a lot this week about how we're at this real inflection point with ESG governance and having to move solutions in-house, having to be the C-suites more accountable and taking ownership of that. What do you all feel is the sort of future, if you were looking in the crystal ball of your organizations and how you're impacted by this kind of inflection point? Megan, let's start with you.
Well, you absolutely have to tie it to your business. I know we all talk about that, but I mean, I try to put everything in terms of how it impacts Cardinal Health. So I use technology to help me do this, and I like to say, don't ever waste a good crisis. And we laugh, we laugh so we don't cry, but it's true, like, don't waste a good crisis. So, I mean, we've got like forced labor regulations that are really impacting some industries right now, right? And we think about supply chain resiliency, and we think about the potential impact to customers if things are detained at the border, for example. We've got, upcoming regulations around climate. We've got so much going on in Europe that I just can't even keep my arms around it, packaging regulations and so on. And so all of these things come with potential fines and fees and taxes if we are not in compliance or innovating our products to be in compliance. If we do not have the data systems that are auditable, that we can rely on to provide the data to these regulatory bodies who are requiring it. When we have an outage at a site because of a major storm, and then I'm in there like, well, battery backup, solar panels, right? So like, it's like I said, you just don't miss the crisis when something happens to your business. You've kind of got to be in there and be like, well, there's actually a better way and we can avoid this in the future. We actually don't have to have this risk, as part of how we operate. We're a distributor, so we're moving products all around the world, right? And you think about the increasing price of fuel and just the increasing price of energy. We have over 300 facilities in our portfolio. And so these are actually easy conversations to have when you put it in terms of cost cutting and business resiliency and just really thinking about the headwinds that your leaders are facing in the business and how ESG can be a lever to pull to help them address some of those challenges. So, and technology helps us do all of that, right?
Yeah, never waste a crisis. I love that as well. Victoria?
Yeah, yes, everything she said. So, yes, and I think one of the other things I'll add in, our company was founded in the 1800s. The person, Bristol, Dr. Bristol, who founded the company, was also responsible for the Quality in Medicine Act being put in place in the early 1900s. We have a very powerful background, as do most companies. We are, sustainability, broad sustainability that is translated through ESG today. It used to be ES, again, agreed, it goes way back. It's about reducing risk and increasing resiliency so we can operate in a low carbon economy, so that we don't destroy the planet, so we can continue to serve, for us, it's our patients. And we bring health equity as one of our top goals for our company. And we have to focus on what is important to our company. I remind people, we do not want to be at the helm of the decision-making that 10 years from now puts our company out of business because we weren't putting the context in, we weren't connecting the dots, and the data is what allows us to do that. And think about this in a 360 sphere perspective. You need a lot of different perspectives, but it's also beyond a human's ability to linear think. So the artificial intelligence capabilities, from monitoring your energy use and doing control smart buildings, it just goes on, but we having tools that allow us to package this in a meaningful way. That's our job right now, is to ensure that we're operating appropriately so that we can continue well into the future. Because for us, there's always going to be a patient. And, I really do not want to live with myself if Bristol Myers Squibb is not able to meet those needs long term because of a stupid decision that we couldn't afford to do an environmental responsibility, or we didn't do our social commitments correctly.
Yeah. Karen, what does the future look like?
That's an excellent question. I think For us, as an energy company, ESG is probably the number one. It will be the number one driver of change. What that looks like is, we don't know yet. Like I said earlier, there are many potential paths. I think, I take a step back and sort of look at it high level, what we really need and what we're driving toward and what technology can help enable is quick, data-driven decisions and prioritization so that we can cut through the noise, because everything that you listed, Megan, it's all important, but it's a lot. And it can be a lot of noise. And a lot of it is really just table stakes. So we need to get past, debates about the basic stuff. Do that so that we can spend the majority of the time and really the sort of, effort around vision and seeing around corners to really figure out, what is the vision going forward vis-a-vis climate change, where we fit as an energy provider, what the world's going to need, and what role we play in that going forward. So it's for us, it's big stuff. And it is absolutely the future of our industry, it's the future of our business, it's the future for our people. And, if leaders don't do it, they're, our people who roll in, they are asking for it every single day. What does it look like? What's the vision? What's the future? So if we get too distracted in some of the other stuff that really is just, we need to do it, we need to comply, we need to not second guess it, and let's focus on the bigger picture. So that's what I see. It's not going to be easy, but that's what the future looks like for us, I think.
Great. So to finish off, let's do a quick lightning round. Let's give our audience some ROI. So the question is, what one thing should our audience members do when they go back and sit at their desks after Green Biz? We'll start with you, Victoria.
Okay. I think there's a self-examination of what is the problem you're trying to solve? What does good look like? Where are you today? Reverse engineer back to where you want to be. What does good look like? And from where you are today, and if you're not sure where you are today, get some help figuring that out in a very data-driven way. And then understand what actions and do you need to take to, it's project management kind of 101, if you will. What are your priorities? What's critical path? And what are the tools you need? Because I guarantee you might think you don't have the skills. You have the skills. Because the technology providers in this room and at this conference are making it able for anybody to do this work. We all have smartphones. We're not 13 years old. We've gotten pretty good at using technology that we never thought we could. Well, some of you might be 14. I am not. But we are much more able to adapt to and embrace the technology. Don't be afraid of it. But you have to think about, don't just go out and buy the hottest ticket in town. Understand your requirements, understand what you're trying to solve, and then go find somebody that can help you solve that. And ask the questions. I think one of the challenges when embracing technology is we get really caught up in, here's what I want to do and here's how I want you to do it, technology provider. Focus, if you're the business, really understand and put your time and attention on what do you need, what are you trying to accomplish, and then go find the company with the technology who can help you make that happen, or companies.
Good one. All right, Karen.
If you don't have 5 to 10 years worth of spreadsheets, then take the opportunity to leapfrog and find the right platforms and technologies and tech stack to take you where you need to be, and leverage the heck out of the folks here, these companies who are full of, talk about expertise, talk about experience in this space. These are some heavy hitters. So I'm going to take my own advice and do that. To continue to build the tech stack. I like that. But yeah, this is the time, and if there ever was a time to really be able to pull together a strong business case and get help from our partners on that, it's now.
Great. Megan, what about you?
I mean, really just to echo what's already been said, I would say think about whether or not you have the tools you need for data visualization to help really with those insights and the driving the decision making. And as I think about it, I would say think about your ESG priorities, your main priorities, and think about the teams who own those priorities, because it's not us, right? For the most part, it's not us. And what technology they have. So, I mean, what I learned when I joined Cardinal is like our transportation and logistics team actually has really interesting visualization technology, right? That we can access and utilize and use for our storytelling. So you're definitely not starting from scratch. There's lots of teams around your organizations that likely have really interesting technology that they're currently using. They may not be leveraging all of the ESG capabilities in it, and that's something that you can step in and help them with. But yeah, I would say think about your priorities, think about technology for visualization across those priorities, and think about where the gaps are.
Really good insights, ladies. I loved that. So I really want to thank Victoria, Karen, and Megan for coming up here today for this great conversation.